So program 2, Claviceps Purpurea, Sacred Fungus. This program will be delving into the history of humanity, how the history of humanity is interviewed to the history of poison and medicine through ergot. Though ergot has an old connection to the sacred origins of medicine, in the Middle Ages, the spirit of ergot was often rooted in religion, the supernatural, or demonology. The Norwegian witch trial contains evidence that stated that witchcraft was learned by consuming ergot, usually in the form of black objects in bread, beer, and other flour products. To explain the effects of the sacred fungus, first one needed to visit the world of Hades. The program brings the ethnobotanical discourse on the history of ergotism and human relationship with plants, perception, and poison, and the understanding of medicine and vegetal allies. We will discuss the origin of pharmakós and how the mystic golden key of poison conveying healing, magic, and science. And for this first talk, we have Torbjørn Alm, who will be speaking about ergot and ergotism in Norway and beyond a dark history. And Julia Carreras will be speaking afterwards. Yeah, I'm just going to introduce Torbjørn to you. So Torbjørn Alm is a professor and botanist and head curator of program in University of Tromsø. So responsible for the vascular plant herbarium in Trondheim Museum. Alm is interested in currently dispersed species culturally dispersed species in general, and in various aspects of the interaction between people and plants, popular plant names, and the use of plants for various purposes, from folk medicine to tools. In his work, Alm has researched the connection of Claviceps Purpurea ergot with cases from the historical archives of the witch trial of Denmark. And I'm just going to give the word to you, Torbjørn, so yes. Thank you so much.
I'll try to start this thing. So, do you see the screen and hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I've had lectures on ergot and ergotism several times before, but usually I have known the kind of public I was speaking for, and I'm not quite as sure in this time and in this context. So what I will do is try to speak generally about ergot and ergotism and what it is and the effects of it, and then I will run through the history of it in Norway and a little beyond Norway as well. So firstly, ergotism, what it is simple. It's the disease caused by ingesting ergot. And ergot is a fungus, usually named as Claviceps purpurea in Latin. Though during recent years, DNA studies have shown that it's actually many different species that are more or less, they look the same. And it's a fungus with a complex life cycle. But what matters in our context is that it infects grasses while they are flowering. And if the grass is infected, instead of growing or producing a seed, what should have been a seed is supplanted by a fungal body, which is somewhat larger than the seed. And it looks like shown on this picture here, those things that are protruding from the grass here are ergot. And ergot are usually black or at least dark outside, and they are more or less spur-shaped. And ergot, although it's now a usual term in English, is originally a French term, meaning the spur of a cock, referring to the shape of it. So it forms something that looks like a grain, but it's a little larger than an ordinary grain and usually curved. And these black grains may contain a large number of different ergot alkaloids. But the chemical composition may vary considerably. And sometimes ergot may be extremely poisonous. And sometimes it may in fact be completely harmless, but you never know. And what matters to us is the interplay between ergot and humans. And that is important simply because grasses and grains are the most important food plants all over the world. Wheat, rye, barley, rice, maize, and so forth. And all grains are grasses, and thus they are susceptible to the ergot infection. And that also means that everybody who eats grain is susceptible to ergot poisoning, which is almost all of us. Very few humans do not eat grain. And we can safely assume that ergotism as a problem for humans is at least as old as grain cultivation. So some words on biology and climate. I mentioned that ergot infects grasses during flowering. And grasses are generally wind pollinated. They distribute lots of pollen into the wind, preferably on warm and dry days, because then the pollen will fly a long way and reach other grasses. And ergot infects grasses if the flowering is slow. If it's rainy and cold weather, for instance, then the grasses will hesitate in releasing pollen. And that leaves open a time window when the ergot can infect the grasses. And the consequence of this is that the rate of ergot infection will be higher in bad years. If the weather is unfavorable for cultivating grain, then you will have more infection, and it will be combined with poor crops. And in the past, when people lived more of subsistence agriculture, they would have to survive on whatever grain they could produce, and they would have to eat it no matter how bad the quality was. And before the 1720s, no one knew what that ergot was poisonous. So they would eat the grass, the grain, no matter how much ergot was found within it. And then there's also another important factor, that some grasses are more likely to get infected by ergot than others. And rye is particularly susceptible to infection. And that is because rye is always wind pollinated. And if the weather is bad, pollination of rye may be slow, and then it will easily be infected. And this also means that wherever people eat lots of rye and has it as a staple crop, they are likely to have problems with ergotism from time to time, especially in bad years. And we may also add that in Europe, rye has always been the cheapest grain, which means that the poorest people would eat rye. And often also ordinary peasants would subsist on rye. If we compare this with wheat, wheat is self-pollinated. It doesn't distribute pollen into the wind at all. And that means it will be very swiftly pollinated. And there's almost no time window available for ergot to infect wheat. And for that reason, the ergot is very rare in wheat. And that has a social consequence. Wheat has always been the preferred grain of people who lived in cities and people who could afford to eat white bread. And because they would eat wheat, they would rarely be affected by ergotism. I will then proceed to the disease. And we should note at once that the result of getting poisoned by ergot is very unpredictable. Anything can happen or nothing can happen, and you never know. But if you are unlucky, it may cause a large range of mysterious symptoms, unlike any other disease. And partly horrible, simply. And Finnish doctors in the 19th century simply described ergotism as the worst thing or worst disease that could at all affect a human being. And a 19th century doctor before the advent of antibiotics would have seen quite a lot of ugly things, but this was worse than anything else. There are two main forms of ergotism. One is gangrenous ergotism, and the other is convulsive, and we will look at both of these. The gangrenous is due to the fact that some ergot alkaloids will cause the blood vessels to contract, which means that you will have the finer ones will be completely closed. And it disrupts the blood supply, usually to the peripheral parts of the body, fingers, toes, arms, legs, that kind of thing. And since the affected tissue gets no blood, it will die and dry out. And it will, if it's a severe case, it will turn completely black and dry out. And as a result of this, when a finger may become completely dry and black and simply drop off, and you can risk also that an entire foot or an entire arm will do the same. There are very few pictures, of course, of such things, since it's a thing of most ergotism is mostly a thing of the past. But there are depictions in art, for instance, by Grünewald and Hieronymus Bosch. And this figure here shows victims of ergotism, missing arms and legs and having them replaced with wooden substitutes. And the picture of the hand here shows the potential consequence of ergotism. Fingers that can go black as coal and the fingertips dying. The convulsive form is very different, and it's at least as scary. The ergot alkaloids are very similar to the signal substance of our nerve system. So if you eat ergot, the fungal poison will send more or less send us barrage of signals through your nerve system. And it may, for instance, cause your fingers to contract or your body to bend or something. And it will be very scary because you will have no control of it. And for people who are affected and do not know what it is, it will simply feel as if someone has taken control of their body or something. And the church typically interpreted this as demonic possession. I've added a couple of old drawings that show the effects. The woman who is sitting here, both her hands are locked, and she is completely unable to open her fingers. And the German doctors who described this case noted that if you should open her hands, you would need to break the fingers. And the other drawings show a person with sort of, what you can call it, contorted limbs. And this effect may cause the entire body to curve back, resembling the effect of tetanus, as in the upper figure. And this may also give the impression that if someone is lying in the bed and affected in this way, that they are flying above the bed, though of course at least the head and heels will be in contact with the bed. And in extreme cases, this effect may cause the body to curve up in circle shape so that the feet touch the back of the head. And you have to be a very skilled practitioner of yoga to be able to do that kind of thing. And if you're locked into that position without being able to control it, it is obviously no pleasure, and staying put that way for a long time is very unpleasant. But there are many other physical symptoms of ergotism as well. It may cause you to lose hearing, temporary or permanently. You may lose the ability to see, temporarily or permanently. And it may cause cramp of the mouth and tongue, for instance, with the tongue protruding, as if you were a member of the Kiss rock group. Or your mouth may be locked in open or locked or closed positions. And the result of this is that you are not able to speak normally, or your voice will sound disturbed, just as they typically mention for demonic possession. Someone else is talking through your mouth, but it's just your voice that you cannot speak normally. A very common effect of ergotism is what is called formication in literature. It gives rise to a scary sensation that something living is crawling inside your body or just beneath your skin. Often described as there are ants running inside you. And the German term for it, Ameisenlaufen, reflects just that. It's ants running. And this is a very common symptom if you are affected by ergotism, seen in most patients. So, in old sources, ergotism is frequently referred to as ignis sacer, or the holy fire. And it causes unbearable pain. And it gives a feeling that part of the body or the whole body is burning. It's suffering from intense heat. And at the same time, you may feel that you are freezing from intense cold. And the figure I've included is from Hieronymus Bosch, and it's an illustration of just this. You have two small devils here with blackened feet due to ergotism, and they are torturing humans. They are frying one, causing unbearable pain, and the other one is pouring ice cold water over another human so that he is freezing cold. And as this is not enough, ergotism has also very profound mental causes. All ergot alkaloids are built upon lysergic acid, which is best known in the form of lysergic acid diethylamide, which again is better known from its German name, or rather the abbreviation of the German name, LSD. And quite a lot of the ergot alkaloids are hallucinogenic. So they cause, if you are affected by ergotism, you may suffer from hallucinations and mental disorder. And in the worst cases, it will cause psychosis. It may also lead to permanent brain damage so that you will never recover. And in the late 19th century, there were still episodes or bouts of ergotism, and some of these were studied by psychiatrists, and they noted that the victims were extremely anxious, and they claimed to see the devil and had scary visions in general. So I will then proceed to history. I'll start just with the list of some of the many episodes of ergotism in Europe. In practice, ergotism, or the earliest known cases, date back to Babylonia and several thousand years ago. But of course, you get much better records the more extensive the literature or written records are. It is known to have occurred in ancient Greece and in ancient Rome, but when we get about the year 1000, then the ergotism occurs over and over again. I've just listed some years here and some areas affected. The records are incomplete, but that's at least some 40,000 people dead in a single such episode, and 14,000 in Paris in 1128. I should then also add Saint Anthony. For the Catholic Church devoted a special saint, Saint Anthony, as a patron saint of those who are affected by ergotism. And the monastic order of Saint Anthony was established to deal with patients or treat patients of ergotism, even though they didn't really have a cure. But at least they knew the disease and tried to help people. And the name of this Domus Contractoria that was started in Lyon is very revealing. Contractoria is, of course, because of the convulsive effect. We'll return briefly to the monasteries later on. I just note that the monks knew the disease and its symptoms, even though they didn't really have a cure, but they were helpful at least. So then we will proceed to Norway. And in Norway, ergotism is likely to have occurred since people started cultivating rye, which was about the year 400. And the first records are in Rogaland, which means the rye land. But there are no written records of anything resembling ergotism in Norway until about the year 1000. But then what is obviously ergotism is mentioned in several saga texts. And I have included a couple of examples here. In the saga of Saint Olaf, there is a female victim who is described as in this way in Old Norwegian or Old Norse, that her body was horribly crippled so that both feet were turned backwards to meet the lower side of her belly. She was curled back in sort of wheel shape, in other words, as we saw earlier. And another saga describes the effect of ergotism, noting that it was felt like fire. And it's very strange that this fire, which is capable of destroying everything, still has no heat. And those who are affected with, in fact, feeling extremely cold at the same time as they were burning up. After the Black Death, Norway went into decline, so there are a lack of written records or few written records for the preceding centuries. We really know there were a number of Norwegian churches dedicated to Saint Anthony, and that the saint was particularly popular in northern Norway, which may suggest that ergotism was more prevalent here than elsewhere in the Norway. But whatever knowledge existed within the church and within the monks was lost with the Reformation. And this sets the stage for a reinterpretation of the disease. So if we proceed to the late 16th and 17th century, there are no records of ergotism as a disease anymore. And there were hardly any doctors in Norway to recognize it either. Instead, we find the strange and unmistakable symptoms turning up in several witch trials, which means that ergotism is now, by the Protestant Church, reinterpreted as witchcraft. And if you look at the Finnmark witch trials, there's one peculiar aspect of them, is that witchcraft is not something you learn. You do not, like Harry Potter, go to some kind of witchcraft school. Witchcraft instead, according to the Finnmark record, it's something you eat. And what you eat is always based on cereals. It is bread, porridge, or it's beer. And several of the Finnmark trials mentioned that the witches had noted black grains or ergot in practice in the porridge they ate before becoming witches. And the Finnmark witch trials and other witch trials in Norway also provide telltale signs of ergotism, or the symptoms of ergotism. So I take a couple of examples here. One trial in Finnmark where a boy is hit and then his arm withers. And is it possible for an arm to wither? And the answer to that is simply yes. And this picture shows gangrenous ergotism in Ethiopia as late as 1978. And if you look at the right arm of the poor boy here, it's not almost nothing left of it. It's just a black dead stick that is about to fall off. And wither is a very precise, very telltale way of describing it. Another example from Norway is rather grotesque. It's a female, not a witch, but a victim of witchcraft in Western Norway. She had a pain where a black spot developed, and then after a piece of her flesh fell off so that you could look straight into her lungs. And as you might expect, she died shortly afterwards. And there's nothing else than ergotism that causes parts of your body to fall off in this way. I mentioned that formication, or the feeling of something living crawling inside you, is very common in victims of ergotism. And there are many examples of this in Norwegian witch trials. One in southernmost Norway is mentioned, not in a witch again, but in a victim of witchcraft. That this disease was very unnatural and that he felt as if he was lying in an ant mound. In other words, he felt like ants or insects crawling inside him. And another such example says simply that there was something living inside him. And there are many such examples. We also find examples of convulsive ergotism. I'll use an example from Denmark in this case, where a victim got ill and fell out of bed. And there were several men were needed to get her into bed again, and they noted that she was as stiff as steel. And that's a likely effect of convulsive ergotism, because since the ergot alkaloids controls your muscles, you cannot decide yourself what you will do. And her body was straightened out and her fingers were stiff. And a trial back in Norway, in southwest Norway, describes a young boy whose mouth was affected in the same way. He was as if mad and gaped very widely without being able to shut his mouth. And when these bouts of disease hit him, even if it was just a boy, you would need two men to sort of rein in or be able to control him. That's again the effect of that ergotism controls your body and muscles, and so that you will appear to be extremely strong in a way. And in general, ergotism has never been common in Norway. It was more common in Central Europe. But that makes it even more likely to be interpreted as witchcraft or anything, because people would never have seen anything like it. And because the symptoms are so strange, it was very likely that they would interpret it as witchcraft or something, evil forces at work. And the real cause of it wasn't known until the 18th century. It was detected by French doctors in the 1720s. So no one, not the layman or not the learned elite, would have any idea what it was or what caused it in this 17th century. And there were hardly any doctors in Norway. At best, there will be a doctor at the royal court. And as a result of this, ergotism could hardly be interpreted as anything else than witchcraft. But ergotism in Norway didn't disappear with the witch trials in the 17th century. We can also find examples later on, because people were, of course, still eating grain. And an example from Uppland about 1740 notes that something they thought was a contagious disease affected several people, and some of them were dumb and deaf, and 2 young people had to amputate their feet because they became black as coal and fell off in pieces. And that is, of course, gangrenous ergotism. And 10 years later, there was what's described as in the records as a ghost story in Skjervøy in Troms, with several victims displaying mental disturbances and physical symptoms that suggest convulsive ergotism. One man complained that a ghost took hold of him and threw him over. And that's a likely way to interpret it if suddenly the alkaloids send signals across your nerve system and cause your body to collapse or bow or anything. You have no control of it, so it seems that someone is doing it to you. And another displayed the effect that he was sort of becoming extremely strong, so that 5 men had to control a single man. And there's a female victim who lost the ability to see and talk, and they tried to heal her with bloodletting. But when they cut her, no blood ensued, and that is again because the ergotism causes the blood vessels to contract, so there is no blood near the skin. And the last case of ergotism in Norway occurred in 1883. And this time there were doctors available, and a local doctor described what happened. And several families were affected. And they had discoloration of the skin, with hands and feet in particular turning red and blue. And they had spasms, more or less like epileptic fits. And the two persons who were most severely affected was a woman who was confused and raged and had to be tied to controlled, and her son who lost his abilities to speak and died of the disease. I should then add a little on who are likely to be affected by ergotism. And that is unfortunately unpredictable, like everything else about it. But there are many medical records of ergotism in the 19th century, and they provide at least some clues that you are more likely to be affected. Firstly, if you are poor, not least because the poor will tend to eat dry. And you are more likely to be affected if your health is poor, if you are malnourished, if you have some other kind of disease, infectious or whatever, or if you have lots of parasites, which was common among the poor at that time. And the records leave no doubt that ergotism is more likely to affect women and children than men. It may sound strange, but it's just to think about the coronavirus, which is the opposite. It's more likely to affect men, as it turns out. But the result is that the ergotism will lead to the same skewed pattern as we see in the witch trials, that the victims are likely to be poor, and that women and children are overrepresented. But of course, it's only humans who can decide who are witches and who are victims of witchcraft and who should be prosecuted and how they should be treated. That has nothing to do with ergot. Ergot serves in practice so to set the witch trials going, and it's certainly not the case that there are evidence of ergotism in all witch trials. But if you have one witch trials, and it will often cause suspicion and lead to further prosecutions. And because you torture the witches, they would be likely to confess that others were also witches, and thus implicate others. So we would get a whole series of trials. I've added a map of ergotism in Norway. And the records that are from medical literature are the dots here, the round dots. And those that are from witch trials are triangles. And in southern Norway, the pattern is the same. You see that both the witch trials and the later medical cases are mainly in the coastal districts, and that's because the coastal districts have a damp climate where you are more likely to get ergot. And those cases that are in the far north of Norway do not fit that pattern, but that's because when you get up at 70 degrees north, there was little possibility for cultivating grain. So the grain consumed there was generally imported from Central Europe or swept for fish. And the grain imported was rye, and it came from what is the heartlands of ergotism in Europe, Germany, Poland, and that area. So a brief summary. Ergotism in Norway is likely to have occurred since one started to cultivate rye, since 400. And it is recorded in saga texts. We know it was in the Catholic times, and it reappears in the 1700s and the 1800s. But whereas in the late 16th century and the 17th century, there's seemingly no records of the disease. But that is because it is instead interpreted as witchcraft. And there are numerous Norwegian witchcraft trials that mention the strange physical symptoms of ergotism. And there are similar examples in Denmark, Germany, and many other countries. And I've added something I think is a very instructive case from Germany in the 18th century, late 1700s. It involves a young boy who displayed the typical symptoms of ergotism, and the disease was easily recognized by the local doctors, because by now both the disease and the cause of it was known to the medical profession. So the doctors wanted to have the boy transferred to a hospital for treatment, but they met fierce resistance from the local clergy. For the clergy refused to accept that this was disease. This was obviously, according to them, demonic possession. And thus they should be handed the boy, and they should treat him in the correct way, which was subjecting him to exorcism. But the clergy met resistance from the local peasants, who refused to believe both the doctors and the clergy, because according to the local peasant, this was obviously witchcraft, and the only way to treat this was by having a witch trial. But of course, in the late 1700s, it was too late. The witch trials, the authorities had stopped believing in witchcraft. But what is instructive here is that depending on your knowledge or your profession, you can interpret ergotism as anything. It may be disease, it may be demonic possession, and it may be witchcraft, even if that it is one and the same thing. It's simply the result of ingesting a poisonous fungi. Yeah, I have finished what I completed. I just add, since you are artist, another little excerpt from Hieronymus Bosch. You cannot understand Bosch without knowing that many of his works were made for altarpieces for churches and monasteries dedicated to Saint Anthony. So what he is depicting, it's ergotism and its horrors. So my final slide is just some literature. And there is, in fact, an entire book by Bauer on ergotism in art. And there are hundreds of papers and books available for those who would like to read more.
Thank you so much, Torbjørn. This was really enlightening and super interesting. I think maybe you can have a few questions, but then we will go straight to Julia afterwards. So do you have questions, or is there anyone in the space who have questions about it? Yeah.
I was just, well, thank you very much first for this very insightful presentation. Really brought a lot of aspects that we didn't know, so we are very curious, so thanks so much. But it was something that it came to me through some conversations about this idea of the choreomany or dancing plague. Do you know about this?
Yes, I know about it. There are several books about the dancing plague, and I've studied some of them, and I strongly suspect that the dancing plague is also due to ergotism, but it's difficult to make out. As often in old descriptions, they are, how should I put it, they are obsessed with the strangest symptoms, but fail to include what I would like to know. Just like the witch trials, you are, in a way, you are lucky if they include the details that tell you what it really is.
There is a question. There is yeah, we have two more questions, and then yeah, maybe we open to Julia. Maybe also has some insights there. Thank you.
Yeah, my question is, I'm not sure if I picked it up during your presentation, but did anybody actually ingest the ergot of rye on purpose? I mean, to induce hallucinations, because I've read that, but you know, it depends on the literature you're reading.
On purpose, no, really not. Since you're German, you know Christian Retz has written large volumes on psychotropic plants and fungi. And there are thousands of hallucinogenic plants worldwide. And people have experimented with almost all of them, but not with ergot for the simple reason that you can, it's too dangerous. You risk to get only the unpleasant physical symptoms and no pleasant hallucinations. So the only ones who have ingested ergot on purpose are some female, because it causes abortion. But then you only need to ingest a few grains. And it was also used in the 19th century to speed up the birth process. And I strongly suspect that is why the 19th century had lots of cases of so-called hysteria in females. I think it was caused by that practice, that doctors poisoned them. They didn't know in a way that they were doing. And at least one American 19th century doctor prided himself that he had never had a birth that took more than a few minutes. And he always used ergot to speed up the process. And it speeds up the process simply because it's convulsive. So it causes the womb to contract and then the baby is forced out rapidly. But I wouldn't recommend it in any way.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I just wanted to ask you if you could just stop sharing the screen so we could just bring you back a full screen into the room. Torben, thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll stay in touch.
No,
I mean, just
Torbjørn, kan du slutte å dele skjermen så vi ser deg bedre?
Stop share, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question for you. So you mentioned that ergotism was changed to witchcraft in the 16th and 1700s, but that has to do with the Protestantism. So would you argue that in the Catholic countries that ergotism is not conceived as witchcraft, but the disease as San Antonio, related to San Antonio?
Not completely, but it's more likely to be interpreted as witchcraft in the Protestant countries because they had sort of dismissed the old knowledge of the disease. You may argue that, for instance, a monastery is dedicated to Saint Anthony in France, for instance. They were used to the gangrenous form of ergotism, which was, but not the convulsive form. So they would perhaps only recognize the one form as something that was a disease, and they may still think that the other form was witchcraft or something. But that's the problem is that the disease takes so many forms, and you can have any combination of symptoms. So it depends on the eyes that see simply.
Thank you so much. We are very grateful.
So Julia will have a lot of different insights also to bring, but I just wanted to we have a question from from online, Mary Bramble. She's asking, did local folk healers know how to treat the symptoms, or everybody was scared to deal with ergotism?
There is no cure really. If you have it's like fungal poisoning in general. If you have got the poison inside you, there's no real way of getting it out again. The only cure in a way is to stop eat bread or cereals or grain that is has an admixture of grain or of ergot. But since people before 1720 didn't know that ergot was poisonous or dangerous, they had no reason to stop eating it.
Interesting. So she replaced just like something. She said that in Navarrese monasteries, a Basque country, monks knew how to treat ergotism. So that is very interesting. We should ask her more about that. Okay. So well, I don't know if any other question. We have to go to Julia because we are running late, but we want to respect all the space and rhythm. So yeah, thank you very much, Torben. Thank you so much. I don't know, maybe Julia has some insights on or something to reflect on your presentation. But before that, I will present Julia Carreras. Okay, so Julia Carreras will be talking about ergot, a forgotten mask of the mystic potions. And Julia is a researcher, practitioner, and teacher of Pyrenean medicineria. She probably can say that better than me. Potion making, and a bruxeria, witchcraft and head writing, who graduated in English studies and linguistics with the University of Barcelona. She is the co-founder and co-owner of Occulta, an endeavor focused on crafting high quality herbal products and artifacts since 2013, as well as contributing to the divulgation of witchcraft and occult herbalism, history and tradition among the general public through collaboration with museums and the like. She has lectured in 2 editions of the Viridis Jenny Symposium in Oregon in 2018 and 2019 editions, and she is one of the founding members of the Gremi de Art, she will say that also better than me, sure, an initiative whose goal is to spread the magical tradition and lore of the Iberian Peninsula through academic insights and both individual and collective practices. She currently resides in the Pyrenees of Spain, where she works with the local museums, eco-museums, the Les Valls de Anneu, organizing ethnobotanical walks, workshops, and folk magic and guided tours. The focus of her work revolves around the awakening and remembrance of forgotten witch and plant lore. So we welcome Julia. Thank you very much for joining us and for your contribution.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Can you see the screen being shared?
Yes, everything looks perfect.
Okay, fantastic. So yeah, I'm definitely having some insight on the questions actually that people have been asking. So in this lecture, I intend to draw this link, this missing link between why is ergo reinterpreted and reunderstood as a sign for witchcraft? Because there are certain symbolic mechanisms that change in history or throughout history that make this association possible, this conceptual or symbolic association possible. But in order to know this, we have to go a bit back in time, and then we'll go further in time and arriving to this day and age, right? Especially folk magic, etc. So first of all, thank you, Torbjörn. It's been amazing, and I recommend you people, attendees, go and check his studies. They are amazing and they are very insightful. So I will not devote a lot of time to, I don't know, analyzing the poisonous effects of ergo, but I will more try to analyze or focus more in the symbolic meaning or the underlying conceptual and social and historical changes that make this association possible. Okay, so in order to start, we have to go back in time. Here it's a quote I always use, okay, when I start talking about a concept known as the pharmakon, okay, Greek concept, ancient Greek concept known as the pharmakon. Herophilus, founder of what we now would call modern anatomy, 2nd and 3rd centuries BC, said, drugs are the hands of gods. Here you see the face of Herophilus in the medicine school of Zaragoza. And so when he talks about drugs, we have to understand any substance that can affect the body or the spirit, because back in the day, there was not such a clear-cut differentiation between body and spirit, because one of or the mind, if you will, if you're more septic or whatever, skeptical or whatever. So there would be not such a clear-cut difference between the two. And drugs then are the hands of gods. They are, they grow in nature and they affect you in more than one way, okay? They affect you completely. Your being is affected by these hands of gods. And this is very important that we have this in mind, because then when other physicians talk about drugs, we have to understand this symbolic all the symbolic implications behind this idea of drugs as being those hands of gods, as there will be a symbolic change, or there will be what is called in Lacanian philosophy, a change in the symbolic order, okay? The things that are normally related to nature in the wildest or least controllable sense will stop being hands of gods to be signs of demonic contact, or diablerie, which is called in French, right? So we start with the pharmakós, okay? Pharmakós, which is the antecessor or the antecedent of what we now use for pharmacy, pharmacology, actually referred to a ritual, okay, a kind of a magical religious Greek ritual in which a person which is a non grata individual to the Greek society, be it a slave, a prisoner of war, etc., was sacrificed, okay, in order to expel evils and illnesses of the community. So the first concept behind pharmakós is not a substance per se, but a ritual. This, with thanks to Homer, the writer, the classical writer, not the Simpsons character, will become the predecessor of the pharmakon, a substance which becomes the solution and the cause to all the evils of a community. This is very interesting. I think you can see it, right? Because I am blocking myself with the Zoom viewer. There, yeah, you can see the image, right? So in this little representation here in an ancient Greek vase, you see this person being ritually sacrificed, okay, probably a slave, as the way it is dressed, and sacrificed by a person, perhaps a soldier, and accompanied by a priest or even a personification of the gods, okay, of a deity. Then it becomes, this pharmakon, thanks to Homer, stops being defined as the ritual, but a substance that affects this idea of the body / spirit. What you see here is the Oracle of Delphi, okay, who was said to be in trance after chewing the leaves of bay laurel, what you see here, okay, being offered by these adepts, okay, and inhaling, the fumes that come from underworld, okay. So this pharmakon, which is the antecessor to our pharmac, to our pharmacy, to our pharmacology, to our idea of a medicinal substance, made no difference between religious and magic, and made no difference between good or bad. What affects you in the body or the spirit can be a nasty or a noxious or a harmful drug, but also a beneficial, okay, a healing drug, okay. There will be no actual differentiation, mainly because, as you know, and this is an anachronic reference here, Paracelsus has always said that there is poison, everything is poison and nothing is poison, okay, all depends on the dosage. But of course, Paracelsus, who was drawing inspiration from the classical authors, so everything here is actually depending on the dosage and the application, okay. There will be medicinal, but also spiritual applications to drugs and the pharmaca, okay, the plural of the pharmakon. That being said, why am I saying all of these things? Because ergo is the perfect embodiment of the pharmakon. It is a poison that kills. It is a potentially, more often than not, fatal substance, okay, as Torbjörn has said in his lecture. A medicine that heals. We have to talk about this later, about obstetrics mainly, as he also has talked about it, mentioned at the end of his lecture, but also, and there's a possibility here, an initiatic drug that illuminates, a substance that acts or affects the spirit, okay. Why do we say that? There are certain archaeological evidences that support this idea of this trifecta idea, okay, of the tripartite idea of the ergo as the perfect embodiment of poison. First of all, in 600 BC, in the Assyrian tablet referring to ergo as a noxious pustule in the ear of grain, noxious being harmful to the body, the human body, and perhaps the spirit. But then in 300 BC, we find archaeological evidences of usage of ergo as a psychoactive substance in Mas Castellà in Girona in Spain. I will show you pictures later, so don't worry about this. So ergot as poison, I will go through this very quickly because Torbjörn has magnificently put it and talked about it. ergotism poison is caused by the toxic molds. The death rate is around 10%, 500 to 200%, 20%, sorry, depending on the era and depending on the manifestation. As Torbjörn said, there are two main kinds of ergotism, convulsive and gangrenous, okay, and there are other effects associated. What is important here is that these other effects could be, okay, or could be seen as not only affecting the body, but also affecting the spirit. And this can be applied to a magical or magical religious application of ergo, okay? And that's the point I'm trying to convey in here. So, ergotism epidemics, there are authors like Solway and Dell who attribute the famous plague of Athens to ergo poisoning. And there is a quote by Thucydides in the history of the Peloponnesian War, because these people had violent heats in the head, redness and inflammation of the eyes, throat and tongue quickly suffused with blood, breath became unnatural and fetid, sneezing and hoarseness, violent cough, vomiting, retching, violent convulsions, etc. You know? But this could also be Ebola, or it could also be Yersinia pestis, okay, what we now know as the Black Plague. And then there are the two main manifestations of the two first manifestations of this ergotism epidemics that take place way before the witch hunt started, okay? So there is a precedent there, okay? People knew that there were something, well, that this happened sometimes, that there was an epidemic, even if people, or even though people did not know what was the cause or the underlying cause behind those epidemics, okay? Sometimes these are attributed to divine punishment, okay? And this is something interesting there to take into account, especially when we talk about the witchcraft related issues, okay? And then also the idea, well, over this relationship between ergotism and St. Anthony's fire. Somebody was asking if this was related to the Protestant Reformation or something, but remember, well, France is a Catholic country. And bear in mind, today I will talk a bit about, or I will focus a bit about the Pyrenean, on the Pyrenean areas and the Pyrenean regions shared by France, the Basque country, Spain, Catalonia, etc. And these are Catholic countries. And there were epidemics of ergotism. So, okay, so this is something that we have to take into account. Ergotism was everywhere. It made no distinction between which religious path you were following, okay? And let's go to what we can make like we can give you some different insight today. Ergot in medicine, okay, used in obstetrics and more. This is referenced in 300 BC for the first time. Noxious grasses that cause pregnant women to drop the womb and die in childbed in the books of Parsley. Of course, it is a bad thing, but this sets a precedent, okay, that will keep going on in folk medicine, because ergo will be used in obstetrics in very risky procedures, of course. As Torbjörn said, it is not recommended to use ergo at all in obstetric medicine, okay, or gynecology. But then in the 1582, if I'm not mistaken, Lanikerus, the German herbalist, advised using ergo in tinctured form, because ergotamine can be used as it affects the muscular contraction of the sanguine vases. This means it can be applied to accelerate childbirth, especially in the last stages of pregnancy, or to provoke an abortion, okay? And also it said that it could help people with prevents excessive bleeding after childbirth, okay, which can lead to death of the mother, okay. But again, I tell you, these are risky procedures, and its usage can lead to this hypercontraction, rupture of the uterus, and very, very other nasty consequences. From then on, from the 19th century onwards, though, ergo is prized because this vasoconstrictor effects, it contracts the sanguine vases, right? And this was advised for healing headaches and migraines, which must be, well, This is a high price to pay to heal your migraine, right? Migraines and such. So I would not recommend it again to control hemorrhages and as a sedative. And this is something that we will go back to. What you see here is the cesarean section from a medieval text. It looks very interesting, right? But what I wanted to share with you here, it was the Pyrenean testimony of ergot usage in obstetric medicine from the 20th century. This is a testimony of a 17-year-old woman from Andorra in the Pyrenees, a little country between France and Spain, okay, who says the following thing. The male wheat, okay, we'll talk about it now, is a wheat which is usually rye. You grow it during spring, and when the grain in June or July is ready, those black grains come out. But that is only used when women are about to go in labor. Another part of the testimony says, it must be rye. It grows when rye is sown in spring. It does not grow in autumn. The male wheat grows in the fields. We used it when a woman had to go in labor but could not deliver. It seems it helped with dilatation. They drank a water made with that grain and Pyrenean saxifrage, what you have here in the picture. Saxifrage is a powerful abortive, okay? Saxifraga longifolia, which is the Latin name for this plant. So what we have here is an actual testimony of a person using it in folk medicine, in traditional or popular medicine, if you will, in a very isolated and rural context. These people had no access to official or university medicine, or well, much better put, socially or academically accepted schools of medicine. Okay, these people had only access to folk healers, okay, and midwives, etc. So, and these people say the male wheat, when they talk about this male wheat in Catalan, they mean this little horn, okay, which is the fungal protuberance, okay, the effect of the grain being infected by the Claviceps Purpurea fungus, okay. So these people mix it with water, and another abortive substance to give rise to this abortive or, well, delivery or helping medicine of some sort, okay. This goes in line with whatever Lonikerus was saying in the 16th century. So there is like this application of this medicine. But then we have another application, which is the idea of ergot as an anesthetic drug of some sort. And here starts, well, this theory that links the Eleusinian mysteries and the Kykeon with ergot started in 1978 by Wasson and Ruck and Hoffman in his famous book, The Road to Eleusis, Unveiling the Secret of the Mysteries. Of course, this is an hypothesis, okay? But there are some archaeological evidences that seem to support this hypothesis. But still, I have to say, this is considered to be unproven by the scientific community. However, it's interesting to reflect upon this. It's these authors, Wasson, Ruck, and Hoffman, claim that ergot was part of the Eleusinian mysteries. For those of you who are not familiar with the Eleusinian mysteries, let me tell you a bit about it. It's very brief simplification, so I recommend you read those books before taking my word as like, this is the definition, okay. In the Eleusinian mysteries, there were annual ceremonies that took place in Eleusis in Greece, okay, it's a place in Greece, where the temple or the sacred site dedicated to Demeter and Persephone, the goddesses of agriculture, was set, okay. In those annual celebrations or ceremonies, there were the lesser rites and the greater rites, okay. The lesser rites were offerings made to the goddesses, etc. But in the greater rites, which had also a very extended waiting list of attendance, okay, you could understand by attending them the mysteries of the harvest cycle, death and rebirth, which is symbolized by those two goddesses, and especially by the descent of Persephone, the daughter of Demeter, to the underworld, okay, symbolizing the death of the harvest cycle, okay, winter, autumn and winter coming, and then her ascent to the world of mortals, okay, which would stand for the symbolic coming of spring and summer. The kykeon was a drink offered to Demeter, okay, when Persephone was condemned to live with Hades in the underworld. So Demeter did not want to drink or eat anything. He was so overcome with grief, okay? But the gods prepare and give her a drink allegedly made with flour and water and pennyroyal. This flour could be, according to Hopman, Wasson, and Rock, contaminated with the ergot fungus. Can you see here a correlation between this and that medicine? The idea here, and this is the theory stated by Wasson and Rock and Hopman, is that when you mix contaminated flour, a flour contaminated with ergot fungus with water, then you eliminate the toxic components of the fungus and you only take the psychoactive ones, okay? Of course, dosage is very complicated and this should not be advised at all. If you want to know more, as Torbjörn said, go check Christian Reitch's studies, okay? Still, this is an hypothesis. What happened in the greater mysteries, okay, that were so famous among the Greek, was that people, okay, could ingest the kykeon, okay, and were revealed the mysteries behind this harvest cycle. So the people who were mystes, which is called in Greek, the people who had their eyes closed, were shown certain plaques and sculptures, okay, in the telesterion, in the ritual site. And after drinking the kykeon, these people understood the mysteries behind death and rebirth, okay? What's important here, and you have to keep this in mind as we move forward, is that this drug, this kykeon, this drug, which is a food as well, okay, is a tool to contact deities. This drug, the kykeon, whatever it is made of, is a way to contact the mysteries of death and rebirth. And this drug, in time, will become an instance of demonic possession or also demonic contact or contact with the devil, okay? Why is it, well, other authors have also claimed there is this correlation between ergot and the kykeon and the Eleusinian mysteries, especially in this sculpture, this relief called the Exaltation of the Flower from the 5th century BC, in which these are Demeter and Persephone, apparently, okay, and what you see here are flowers. People say they are poppy flowers. Others, they say, are pomegranate buds. But according to other authors like Giorgio Samorini, it said that these are fungi, okay, of some kind, perhaps a psilocybe fungi of some kind, okay? But this is something that we have to bear in mind. Of course, these are all hypotheses, but they are very interesting to have, and especially when we relate it to this first archaeological evidence of the usage of fungi or the ergot fungus in a ritual context. This is the archaeological site at Mas Castellà in Girona, okay, where traces of Claviceps or Claviceps Purpurea remains were found in a human mandibula and a beer vase inside this temple dedicated to Demeter, okay. You see here this little statue of Demeter found in the Mas Castellà archaeological site dating from 300 BC. Okay, and this is the quote of this study that analyzes this finding. The fact that there are traces of Claviceps purpurea fungus, in a mandibula bone, okay, in the jaw bone, and in a beer vase, well, makes us think about the idea of this fungus perhaps being potentially, we don't know if willingly or not, consumed in this ritual context, okay? This would be the claim, okay? And this would be the archaeological evidence that seems to support this claim, okay? What happens here? Why am I saying all of these things? These symbolic associations between understanding mysteries or the religious or magical religious dimension attributed to a potentially fatal substance will become very important with the witch hunt, okay, or with the witch race, if you will, okay. But this only can be explained if we understand this symbolic change, okay. When drugs are no longer the hands of gods and they become the gifts given by the devil to those who worship him, okay. How does this happen? There is a progressive change during the Middle Ages. If you're interested in that, you can read Lucia Muraro, for example, or well, any other medieval folklorists and historians, according to whom nature, especially during the lower Middle Ages, okay, becomes something that has to be dominated and controlled. There is a growing separation or a dualist separation of nature. There is good nature, that which is controllable, that which obeys God, that which is contained within the garden, that which is okay and accepted. And then there is evil nature, the one that you find in the forest, the one that you find in certain other not so controllable medicinal substances, especially the nightshade family or fungi, okay? When drugs, as this broad meaning word, become no longer the hands of gods, okay, they have to be something else. And in fact, you can even see that, and I'm sure Torbjörn would say a lot of things about this. There are many popular nouns associated to the devil and witches, okay? When we look at certain plants, of course, not always they are poisonous plants, but there are also some medicinal plants associated with witches, for example, or fairies, but the ones that are associated with the devil tend to be potentially toxic plants. Okay, here you have a couple of Teufelsbeere with the Atropa belladonna, the devil's berry, or Sogin, I don't know how to say that properly in Basque language, which is pointer witch, referring to the psilocybe mushrooms. Okay. What you see here in this picture is a wild man, okay, the people who live in the woods, but also a folklore character associated with, of course, the devil and witchcraft, and especially in some instances of or Western folklore or European folklore celebrations, this association which will be even clearer, okay. Why are we devoting time to this? To explain this, okay? And now I'm talking about this concept of medzineria, and now you will understand why. Folk medicine and obstetrics linked to medzineria, poison making. The word medzina, okay, which is a word in Old Catalan, okay, comes from the Latin medicus, doctor, a term used to refer to substances that could instinctively, cure or cause a disease. The medzina is like the pharmakon. It's a substance which has no associated morals or no associated virtues or negative aspects per se. It depends on how you use it, okay? And this medzina is very important for us in the Pyrenees, because if we look at the progression and the evolution of the concept of medzina, we will see how this relates to witchcraft and how it changes its meaning, okay? It's like seeing the pharmakon changing its meaning throughout history, and you can see it like in real time, okay? Year per year. Medzina was a word used to describe both people who could act as doctors and give you medicine, but also people who could kill you with poison in the beginning, okay, during the Middle Ages. But then As we start moving further into the Renaissance in the early modern times, you start seeing the first concerns regarding this knowledge and usage of medicinas, these pharmaca. In 1247, you see these first recommendations made by Bishop Vidal Mayor de Cañellas, saying that medicinas, poison making, understanding it as drug or medicine making, and divination had to be condemned equally. Okay, that's a precedent. Okay, then in 1328, we find one of the first cases, not witch trials, okay, but certainly a precedent for witch trials that would take place in less than 100 years, in the French Pyrenees, in La Bastille-Saint-Clarens, where Joanna la Christian Joan, which is, okay, that's funny in this time, was charged with poisoning people and being a bad herbalism, being a medzinera, okay, and being a bad herbalism. So there was judicial precedent here, that established a link between making those pharmaca, these medicinas, and killing people. And there was a possibility of you being a bad herbalism, okay? This is where this change of meaning starts. When the pharmacon, in our case in Europe, was preserved as something good, pharmacology, pharmacy, pharmacists, etc. But the medicina nowadays in Catalan is used to refer only to harmful poisons, okay? The venenum malum, okay? From that moment on, from the 14th, 15th century, centuries on, medicineria and the knowledge of these neutral or either good or bad substances was systematically prosecuted, okay? This was supported by laws, okay, being made in the area, in the Iberian Peninsula. James I, the King James I, proclaimed that everyone who wanted to work as an apothecary had to undergo an examination, and that only people who had a title, like a degree of some sort in the university, could work as herbalist. That sets a very complicated precedent for people living in isolated mountain communities, okay? Especially because if you get sick, nobody can help you unless you have a lot of money and you can afford paying for an official doctor. But at the same time, you are demonizing folk medicine, and the people who are using or working as folk healers will be increasingly demonized and prosecuted. And when things go bad and when things go south, etc., when the people start prosecuting witchcraft, who will be the first to fall? Those who are already seen as evil by the community, okay? So this prosecution of medicineria, establishing this precedent for the prosecution of witchcraft, this is something studied by many historians, okay, like Pau Castell and Carlo Ginzburg, etc. There were these instances during the 14th century, okay, these trials conducted against herbalists and healers and midwives of every kind. But there were no witches tried whatsoever. Why is that? Because pre-witch craze witches are not human. And this is one of the main concerns we have when studying the history or the problematics associated to witch trials. Pre-witch craze witches are nocturnal, non-human spirits that kill cattle and kill people during their sleep, that bring nightmares, that conjure storms, that damage the crops, that kill your cow, that give you misfortunes, etc. But when the witch starts being humanized, okay, then the witch is attributed with the crimes of medicineria, poison making, medicine making, divination, sorcery, of all those kinds, okay? And How do we know that? Look at this, one of the first European laws, civil laws, not religious bulls, that is something, well, anterior, of course. This Ordenaciones de las Valls d'Àneu, okay, 1424. Let me read it for you. It's what you see here. We firstly establish and command that from now on, if any man or woman in the aforementioned valley, that is this valley of Àneu, is found to go at night with the bruxes, with the witches, at the Bog de Viterna, the devil, and pays homage to him, taking him as their lord, denying the name of God, and he or she kills or murders little children at day or night, and gives them gatirnons or bushels, I will tell you about it now, and administers them medicinas, this dual drug drug, medicine, poison, etc. Such man or woman who commits those crimes shall lose their bodies, and the possessions shall be confiscated by the Lord. You see here why, for example, in the Pyrenees, there was this, okay, massive trial and prosecution of people, especially in this area in the Valley of Àneu, okay? What you see here is, look at the phrasing. Any man or woman is found to go at night with the witches, okay? People are not witches, but they are going with those nocturnal spirits and doing harm to people. And what do? They kill or murder little children at day or night and gives them gatirnons or bushels. Gatirnons are swelling of the ganglia, is explaining also, for example, the symptoms of the plague, okay, the bubonic plague especially, and administers them medicinas and gives, and this people is found to go with the witches and give other people medicinas, working as a folk healer, okay, of some sort. These people will be tried, will be killed, and their possessions will be confiscated and given to the feudal lord. Remember, 1424, in our area, in the Pyrenees, there was a big economical crisis for feudalism, okay? Feudalism is about to die in the area. So the lords, okay, the people in power, the authorities need to keep their power, economical power, okay, and need lands, okay, in order to do so. So there is certainly a correlation between the progressive humanization of witches and the witch craze, okay? How did it all work so well? Because in the area, there were folk beliefs predating the witch hunt that validated this persecution. So people already believed that there were harmful spirits, but now they were given an explanation. That harmful spirit is actually your neighbor, okay? How can I prosecute a person when it is actually a spirit? Well, I have to give it a name and I have to give it a human entity. And what signs do I use in order to accuse you? Whatever it is you're doing. If you do folk medicine and folk magic or folk herbalism of some sort, and you're incurring in the medicinaria crime and you're giving people medicinas and you're acting as a midwife, you will be the first one to go. And this is what happened, especially here in the Pyrenees. There's a big emphasis, and actually I loved when Torbjörn said that witches are not something you learn. Witchcraft is not something you learn, but it's something you eat. That's exactly what I was trying to say. Thank you, Torbjörn, for saying that. There is like this important accusation in Pyrenean witch trials in our area called the malboussie. That piece of this mouthful of food that was bewitched, okay, that was cursed of some sort, okay. And in our area, the majority of witchcraft cases in the Pyrenees are associated with poison making, okay. And even late in time in the witch hunt period, you see here the case of Gabriela Sansi, who was tried between 1591, 1592, sorry, who was accused of having poisoned a pot of broth and having fed it to the local authorities. Okay, this person was dispossessed of all her properties, was executed okay, in the local castle, and her properties were given to those who executed them. Okay, I think there's questions perhaps. Okay, great. Other people say, and this is an unimproved thesis, and I would definitely not go there, but I wanted to share this with you, that the Salem witch trials could be also associated to some sort of bewitched and poisoned food, perhaps even a case of ergotism, okay? But this is, of course, a thesis started by Linda Caporel, but it's still unconfirmed. And I don't know, I would not go risking going there. Whatever you can see here, a bewitched woman vomiting, which is quite aside, okay? What are the consequences of ergotism, food contamination? Because perhaps there is a link there between this, as Torbjörn said, and I'm not even going into that because I don't think we need this. Torbjörn explained it so fantastically, of ergotism and food contamination linked to poison making and witchcraft in mountain folk beliefs. First of all, there are symbolic associations. The black bread, which is consumed, and this is something that comes up in folk tales and folk legends about witchcraft. The black bread consumed at the witch's Sabbath. This is the classic association, okay, made also in several texts and by several researchers, okay. This could be perhaps even an explanation of ergot contaminated bread. We don't truly know, but this could be an explanation. Also bread that makes you mad or that makes you see the devil, okay, and this was given as an explanation during the Renaissance by certain physicians and doctors. And then, which is more important, at least in this case, because we have tools to prove it, the protective measures that are still to be found in certain folk beliefs in the mountain area. Protective measures intended to protect, with the redundant term, the food, and especially bread, from being bewitched. Okay, because here the correlation, okay, between this ergotism and the knowledge of how to use ergo fungus, perhaps in midwifery and obstetrics, disappears in time, except from certain testimonies, as we said, as we saw with this little testimony from this 78-year-old woman from the Pyrenees. But then you see there are like reminiscences of this fear against being poisoned or bewitched through food. First of all, here in our area, and even I think everywhere in the Iberian Peninsula, and perhaps even in France, etc. In some Catholic countries, people, before parting the bread or cutting the bread, they draw a cross on the back of the bread in order to expel witches and potential evil eye and bewitchment of the food, okay? Then you have these brands and marks. This is a protective symbol, okay, the hexafoil symbol, used in a bread brand. This is used to brand breads when they bring it to the community oven, because people did not have an oven. Everyone had to go to the wealthiest house in the area or in the town and put their bread loaves there and cook them and bake them there. So in order to identify their bread, but also to protect it from being touched by unwanted hands, they would put this protective symbol on the bread. Okay, this would be a branding. And then bread knives like the one that you see here, okay, which are used as a sign of authority, but also as a magical and protective tool, because these bread knives are also used for cutting the clouds that bring the storm. And if you remember that, witches are said to be the responsibles of bringing the clouds and conjuring up storms. Okay, so there would be this link there. This existed, I mean, this was used, and this certain rituals here have been carried out until very recently. I'm talking about 20 years ago, people were still cutting clouds, and even perhaps now in some isolated areas, they still do that. Okay, but this association between bewitched food and conspiracies of witches and heretics and devil worshippers continues in the area. Here in the 1950s, this brutal case called the Affaire du Pont Maudit, okay, in Pont de Saint-Esprit, which is called the cursed bread. Okay, this is a contaminated, a case of ergotism in the 1950s in France, okay, which was called the cursed bread. And people, first of all, attributed it to witches and perhaps even people from the area who wanted the townsfolk killed, okay. But then when the press got mingled here, especially with these issues by Live magazine, etc., people started associating it to the CIA and special spy actions being taken in the area. So what once was an instance of witchcraft now became like a CIA conspiracy. Okay, that's a very interesting point. And what you see here is a person perhaps suffering from convulsive ergotism of some sort. Okay. Right now, I just wanted to share this with you because there's this distant cousin of ergo, the darnel, poison darnel, which is also tends to get infected with fungi like ergot and spreads infection to grains, much like what happens with infected rye, okay? But it's interesting that darnel was used in witches' ointments, okay? And was associated with vice and with the devil and was used for drunkenness as a component or a complement in beer brewing, okay, because it has toxic effects like nervous digestive problems that sometimes the effects are undistinguishable from the first symptoms of ergotism. But then what happens is that darnel appears again and again, okay, in those mentions of the witch's ointment and is associated with the devil and witchcraft, okay, and also used medicinally. I only wanted to finish with this little representation here of the enemy, Satan, sowing darnel seeds, and this is what is growing here, okay. What I've been trying to convey in this lecture, and I'm finishing now, is that there's been this, of course, this evident association between ergo and witchcraft, but this association is only possible, right, when there is a symbolic change going on that is accepted by folk people, by everyone, by common people, but starts probably in religious and social or political authorities, okay, and that would be it. Anyway, I think it's done. I'm in time, right?
Thank you so much, Julia. So much insights. That yeah, I think I'm just gonna open for questions to the public. I guess yeah, maybe also Torben wants to reflect on it. So yeah, thanks so much, Julia. Is any questions? Is it Torben? You have maybe some kind of insights?
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I could only comment on darnel that it's well known in Norway as well, not in terms of witchcraft, but in terms of people getting dizzy by drinking beer brewed with a mixture of darnel. And the effects are the same as for ergotism, if not as serious.
Yeah.
And that's because it's not the seeds that are poisonous, but the whole plant, because it has other members of the Claviceps family, the same fungi family as ergot, and they grow inside the grass, so the whole grass is poisonous. And I have have a manuscript on Daniel and the poison that have been lying about for years, because exactly because the problem of discriminating between the effect of Daniel and of ergot.
Yeah.
And of course, Daniel, like all other grasses, may well be infected by ergot as well. So you could have both in the same package, so to speak.
I just wanted to mention it because sometimes it's overlooked, and we totally need this paper. You have to write it. But yeah, definitely, and it's sometimes this overlooked as something that, well, you never link it to ergotism, but Darnell has so much literature and symbolism and religious associations with it, which makes it very interesting as well, right?
Yes, wonderful. Well, just this notion of the pre-witch, no, the prehistorical witch, no, and how by humanizing we start to ban and demonize, the practice of a herbcraft. So that's just to highlight that is something that a threat to follow. And then one question that is the dose, no, because the Torben was talking about the dose, and of course we now know exactly what dose we have to use, no, in the laboratories they use for specific medicines. But how did they? Just a question for Julia. How midwives were how did they know the dose? So what kind of relationship would they have with ergot, with the spirit of ergot, so that the spirit of ergot could somehow give them maybe this information? I don't know, that is a supposition from your point of view.
We can only claim that this happened after the 16th century. Okay, so this association between ergo and obstetrics perhaps was first observed by Linnaeus in 1582, but then was applied by common people and common folk. But this is something that I'm still amazed at this people isolated from Andorra and the Pyrenees saying, hey, there's an application there. Of course, when you see this mention in the book of Parsis from 350 BC, saying that this pustule of grain can kill people, can kill women during childbirth, and cause this excessive bleeding and abortions, etc., and dropping the womb. This perhaps was read by others saying, hey, there's perhaps a medicinal application here. We truly do not know how this progressed. I don't know if Jorgen would probably know that. But it's one of those complicated, mysterious things, at least to me.
Thank you very much. Torben, do you have something to say about that?
Nothing in particular at the moment, at least.
Okay, so I think we have one more question. No, there is no more questions. I think your lecture is so rich that really feels like after all this, we really kind of have to digest it, because you spotlight in many spaces that are uncharted roads, and for us it's a very exciting and also inspiring as the Witch Trust project that will be presented in the next program, and Neo-Pharmacopoeias. It's also a webinar Iberian collaboration for hopefully next year, and also Portugal and Spain. So, and Julia is part of the project. So we are very happy that that we, through this conversation, we can start to allow the spirit to guide us where to go next. So thank you so much. I'm gonna pass the word to Amalia.
Yes, I just also want to thank you so much, both of you, for these brilliant lectures. They were so insightful and a lot of things to digest, which is quite a nice allegory, since we're talking about eating witchcraft. So thank you so much. And we will have a short break now for 30 minutes. So we'll be back again 15:30 with the program 3, which is called Neopharmacopoeias and the magical body. So do you have anything more to add before we go to break?
Just to say that the first presentation will be a lecture performance by Invisible Drum, so kind of artistic approach. And then we have a Silvia Federici talking about the mechanical body at the age of reason, just at 4:30 after. Thank you so much, Julia, and you are very invited to stay with us, of course. Thanks.
See you. Thank you. Thank you all for being here.